Hey, I'm John Cannell, and today on Preppy Kitchen we're making an amazing melt-in-your-mouth rum cake. So let's get started. First off, set your oven to 325 so it's nice and not too hot. We don't want to burn this cake. Now in a large bowl, I'm adding 3 2/3 cups or 440 grams of cake flour. Some of the best cakes will use a special flour just for them, and this is one of them. Cake flour is lower in protein and it is more finely milled, so it just gives you a better, more delicate cake crumb. All right, now it's perfect. You don't want to add too much flour to your cake, which is why it's always best to use a scale. If you're not using a scale and you're using measuring cups, that's okay. However, you're going to fluff the flour up in your canister and then sprinkle it in with a spoon and level it off. You don't want to pack the flour down because then your cake will be drier, breadier, denser, and just not as delicious. To puff things up, I'm adding 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. For balance, we're adding 3/4 teaspoon of salt. So important to have salt in your desserts, otherwise you do not get a balanced flavor. The salt helps you taste things. Otherwise it'll just be dull and sweet. Grab a whisk, and we're gonna mix it up. Our scale is done. We want the leavening agents and salt fully distributed so every bite is delicious and perfectly risen. Our dry ingredients are done. Let's set this aside and now either grab a big bowl and a hand mixer or your stand mixer. Now for the wet ingredients, we have a little bit of a twist. We're gonna use butter and oil, mostly butter because it's delicious and this has been softened appropriately, so my finger can make a dent pretty easily. 3/4 cup of unsalted butter, that's 170 grams, or 1.5 sticks. I also want 1/4 cup of veggie oil. You could use any neutral oil for this, but the vegetable oil is gonna give you a really soft cake. And a lot of the times our cakes are either cold out of the fridge for leftovers, or like on the counter or room temperature, and butter just gets a little bit harder. Get that in there. So using a little bit of vegetable oil will give you a super soft, tender cake, even if it's the day after or 2 days after. In my humble opinion, butter-based cakes, which are my favorite and delicious, are best warm out of the oven, but that's not likely because you often are icing it, letting it set up in the fridge or storing it for later. And when they come out of a cold environment, the butter-based batter is gonna be just more set up and hard. I also want 2 cups of granulated sugar, that's 400 grams. And I'm using measuring cups because sugar's a liquid. By the way, if you like my videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's 2 new recipes every single week and lots of shorts too. Now pop your paddle attachment on, or if you're using a hand mixer, get to work. We're gonna beat this together on medium speed for about 5 minutes until it's light and fluffy. It's really important to break the butter up and aerate the mixture so it'll be just full of tiny little bubbles throughout and nice and creamed. Okay, we're back. The magic of editing. Five minutes later, this looks like a light, fluffy, magical cloud. Take a look at this texture and color. Full of air bubbles and so soft. Totally want to spread this on toast and take a bite. By the way, this cake, I think of this as a classic American or even Southern cake, but dark rum, Caribbean. This is from the Caribbean, and of course, British colonists obsessed with rum, along with pirates, and some delicious things arose, including this style of cake. It's like how to fail a history test with John Cannell. Now it's time to add the eggs in one at a time, but we have 3 eggs and 2 yolks, so let's separate out the yolks first. This is why you use separate bowls, my gosh. That was the worst egg crack I've ever done. And 2. Plop. All right, and now we'll just go ahead and crack the eggs in. So continue mixing on medium, add your yolks in, add that in slowly. And now it's time for our 3 whole eggs. 1. Best practice is to crack it into a separate bowl in case there's a cracking mistake. 2, and last egg. Right now this is golden on the inside and pretty white on the outside, so let's just take one quick minute and scrape the bowl down. This is such a lovely texture. We added the eggs in slowly, so the mixture hasn't broken and it's just silky, soft, and cloudy. Lovely. If your butter's too cold, you can get that kind of cottage cheese consistency, which isn't the end of the world, but it's not the best thing ever either. All mixed up, so let's add in 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And now for the good stuff. It's gonna be dark rum time. You can use whatever your favorite dark rum is, but this is gonna get baked, so if you are a rum connoisseur and you have delicious sipping rums, like I did at one point, don't use that, just use a medium good rum, not plastic jug, but not very expensive either. Let's measure out 3/4 of a cup of dark or spiced rum. It seems like a lot because it is. To the rum, I'm also adding 1/2 cup of plain, boring old milk, but we need some of this for the recipe too. Can't be all rum. Give it a mix if needed, but this looks fine right now. Now it's time for the fun part. We're gonna get this batter completed. We're gonna add the dry mixture, alternating with the wet mixture, starting and ending with the dry. 3 dries, 2 wets. So grab about a cup of the dry mixture and sprinkle this in while the mixer's running on low. 1/2 of the wet mixture goes in. Another 1/3 of the dry. Let that incorporate. Add the remaining rum milk mixture. And by the way, you could use bourbon as well. It would just be a bourbon cake, but still delicious. Plop that in. Mix it up until it's almost combined, and I always like to finish batters off with the spatula. That's great. There's still streaks of flour throughout, but let's just fold that in together so it's perfectly mixed and not overmixed. All right, scrape that down. Definitely see lots of different colors in here, so the spatula is your best friend. By the way, when you're making cookies, cupcakes, whatever, you could always use dark rum or bourbon instead of vanilla if you ran out, or if you just love dark rum and bourbon. They are totally acceptable flavors, in my humble opinion. This is nicely mixed. Now let's grab that big bundt pan. So your 12-cup bundt pan needs to be prepared or it will have a stuck cake inside. You have 2 choices, baking spray or butter and flour it. Normally I always say butter and flour, but I had a lot of comments saying, gosh, I like baking sprays, it's easier to use, and I totally get it. So because we're using the lower baking temperature, it's 325 and not 350, you can use the baking spray and it's not gonna give you a really dark cake. It'll be perfectly golden. Just spray it really well. And if you're not a fan of baking spray, just butter and flour it really well. If you don't have a bundt pan, you could use a 9-inch tube pan like you would for angel food cake. Just make sure it is really well greased. Or you could use 2 9-inch loaf pans. Same deal, just make sure they're nicely greased, and the baking time will be reduced about 10 to 12 minutes. I used a good amount of baking spray, so it's kind of pooling at the bottom. So if that's the case, just grab a little pastry brush and brush it up the side. Okay. Our pan's well greased, so let's get all that batter in there and then go into the oven. This smells so good. It is wild. Something about dark rum, and dude, it's so good. Just try and make sure there's no air bubbles in there, so you can use your spatula and just swoosh the batter around as you go, and make sure it's all nice and level too. If you want some more texture and flavor, you could add a cup of finely chopped pecans or walnuts. Really just sprinkle them in and then put your batter on top, and they'll get nice and toasted in the oven and get all that delicious rum flavor. Highly recommend. Final air bubble comment is just tap it on the counter with a towel over it, or you could run a skewer through and just like search and hunt for any air bubbles. My rum cake is ready to go into the oven, 325 for about 1 hour, or until a skewer inserted in the center comes out clean. In the meantime, we're gonna make our amazing rum glaze, because there is more rum in this cake. In you go. At the 50-minute mark, 10 minutes before your cake is supposed to come out, we're gonna make our glaze, because you want the cake to be warm and the glaze to be not overcooked. Everything should be like nice and warm. so that it soaks in there. If the cake is too cold, it'll kind of just pour off. In a medium saucepan, I'm grabbing 6 tablespoons of butter and we're just gonna melt it over medium heat. While it's melting, go ahead and add a big pinch of salt. And you'll wanna measure out 2 tablespoons of water, half a cup of sugar, and a 1/4 cup of rum so it's ready to pour in. Once your butter's melted, we're gonna add the sugar and water and stir it just until it's combined. Give that a stir. We're gonna let this cook and come to a boil, and then once it comes to a boil, carefully stir the rum in and let it cook for an additional 2 to 3 minutes until it thickens up just a bit. Stir occasionally and you'll notice it change consistency pretty quickly. We're also cooking off a lot of the alcohol in this cake because you don't want to just have all of that rum unadulterated, right? Now, if kids are nowhere to be seen in this arrangement, and if you feel like it, once it comes out of the oven, you could really just pour half a cup of rum or more over it and totally soak the cake. I think that's delicious, but that takes it to another direction. Optional. Think about it. Maybe. As this cooks down, you'll notice the bubbles become a little bit larger. You'll hear the difference, and it's time to take it off heat once it thickens. This is thickened up enough. I'm gonna take it off heat. If it gets too thick, it really is not gonna soak into the cake, so you wanna have just that right amount. Just let that hang out in that hot pot to keep it warm, and then when the cake comes out, we're gonna get to work. Just came out of the oven. It looks so nice, but now some good work to do. We're gonna poke it all over the top with skewers. 1 skewer. I wanna have lots of holes for this glaze to sink into. This cake has such a delicate crumb, you can feel it just by poking into it. Cake's like, what did I ever do to you? Okay. Grab your sauce and a measuring cup. I'm gonna transfer it over just so I can be sure because I want half for now and half for later. Oh. Every last drop. Okay, half now and half for when it comes out. Let this soak for 15 minutes and then we're gonna go on to the next step. It's been 15 minutes, so we're gonna grab a cake plate or anything you wanna use. And now we're gonna invert it. Please come out right. Moment of truth. Ah, so nice. Look at that. Oh. Just smell it for a while. If you're like me and you want to make things in advance so you can have them at a moment's notice, this is a great cake to freeze. Wrap either the whole cake or individual pieces tightly in plastic wrap and then wrap those in foil. Then pop those into a freezer bag or a sealed container, and this can hang out in the freezer for up to 3 months. When you're ready to bring it out, I like to let it thaw and then you can warm it up in a skillet with butter. It will taste so good. Trust me on this. All right, this looks lovely. However, it would be even nicer with some beautiful rum glaze spooned over the top. And you can spoon it or brush it on. I'm gonna do a little bit of both. If you do use a spoon, go very slow so it has a chance to soak in. I'm gonna switch to the brush because I wanted to have beautiful glaze all over, not just nice strips. Your cake can be served warm or cooled, and it is so good. Dust it with powdered sugar or with a big scoop of ice cream. Vanilla or pistachio are my favorites. A giant dollop of whipped cream. I mean, the list goes on. You could even drizzle caramel over it. Or make a quintuple batch of this glaze and just pour it completely over the cake as you slice. You'll notice the glaze soaks immediately. It's not super runny. It is not just sitting on the top, just the right texture. Give it a slice, and just like that, it's ready to enjoy. That is so good. That rum sauce melts the cake. It's like pudding almost, but in the best way possible. I hope you get a chance to make this delicious cake, and if you like this video, hit that subscribe button and check out my bundt cake playlist.